Hey everyone, I'm James Otter from Otter Surfboards and we design and make wooden surfboards. I'm here in our workshop down in Porthtowan in Cornwall and I'm going to take you through the process of making one of our boards. This is put together specially for you, the Wolf and Badger followers, for part of the London Design Festival. We've never done this before, so bear with us. We're going to go through every stage of the process of making a board. It normally takes over a week, but we're going to try and condense as much of it into 20 minutes as we can for you. And we're going to start off by taking a look at the timber stack that's outside. So we're going to start off having a look at our poplar here. So the planks on top are a little bit ropey because we normally leave those on there while it's still outside here. The poplar's all from Salisbury, down in the southwest of England. It's from a particular mill just outside Salisbury. And then we've got our western red cedar on the other side here. This is the timber we predominantly use. And we know Nick quite well, who manages the woodland down there. So we trust that our timber comes from a really sustainable source. So once we get those planks from the sawmills, we take them into the workshop and we start machining them. So follow me. So once we bring our timber in from outside, the first thing we do is we plane a nice clean surface onto one side. We then cut the edges neatly and get it ready to go through the bandsaw. And we then cut it, we rip cut through the middle of the plank on the bandsaw to give us two halves for each plank. And what that gives us, we've got a few of those here, what that gives us is this beautiful symmetry from the plank where we've opened it up, and those are going to go into the surfboard, and that symmetry adds a really beautiful element to the boards. We take a series of those and put them together in a skin here, so we make a skin for the bottom of the surfboard and we make a skin to go on the top. You can see this one's just freshly come out of the clamps and is ready for sanding. We sand these to a consistent thickness, so we make sure that they're 4mm for the bottom and 6mm for the top. And then once we've got those, we've got a frame that we're going to cut, and then we've got some rail strips we're going to cut and start assembling. So I'm just going to take you through the components that are on the table over here. We've got our framework, which is the bit inside the surfboard that's going to determine the shape of the board. We're going to glue that down onto our bottom skin, and then we build the rails, which are the side of the surfboard. We build those up in these thin strips. And if you can have a look at those, I don't know if you can see the profile where you are. They've got what we call a bead on one side and a cove on the other, and those nest inside of each other as they then build up along the side of the rail. I'm going to show you how we're going to glue one of those on in a minute, but first of all we need to get this framework out and piece it together. The framework here is designed on some CAD software that we use for designing the surfboards, and then it's cut with a laser cutting machine. So it gives us a nice accurate shape, allows us to make the same surfboard every single time. Normally they're quite easy to pop out, but sometimes they can be a little bit fiddly. So the first thing is to check that this all fits together, and it's the accuracy of this all fitting together that really set kind of how the board is. So those fit together nicely. That's going to be the piece that runs down the centre of the board here, and then I just need to check. So we call that our stringer, and I need to check that all of these fit neatly into our stringer, and I call these ones our ribs, so each one being the ribs. You can see in a way it does resemble a skeleton, and in some ways I guess that's what it is. So I need to start with my number one. You can see each of these has a little number in it, and that just helps us piece them together. It means that if we haven't got them, we know exactly where it should go. So number one is down at the tail for us. Just want to double check, before I glue any of it together, I just want to double check they all fit together nicely. So number one, number two, nice, they seem to have all come off nicely. Number three. And the plywood that we use for this is a poplar plywood. So poplar is a timber. Part of the reason we like it is because it's actually quite lightweight. So this is a poplar plywood that's grown and manufactured in Spain. So it's quite nice. Some plywoods it's quite tricky to actually know where they've come from. So it's always quite nice for us. As I mentioned with the timber out the front, it's really nice for us to know exactly where our wood is from. So they're going to go together. They all fit together nicely. The process of gluing those together and then fixing them down onto this skin is actually about half a day. So we're going to skip through that. I'm going to go over onto a board that's already got some of these rail strips on. I'm going to take you through the process of gluing one of those on. So follow me over to the other side of the workshop again. Over here then, we've got a board that's had a few rail strips put on. You can see the framework has been glued down onto the bottom skin. We've started building these rail strips up one by one. Each one takes kind of 20 minutes, half an hour to glue on. So I'm going to glue one on for us now. As I've said before, these rail strips, they've got a bead on the top and a cove on the bottom. So they're going to nest on top of each other as they bend and twist down the rail of the board. It's going to give us a nice tight glue join all the way along the board. And for this one, I'm going to need to do some gluing and some steaming. So I'm going to work my way around this side of the board, get some of our glue on. So this is a single part marine grade polyurethane glue with a bumped up end, which is always handy. So I'm going to run this little bit of glue along here. And then I'm going to work my way back along, putting a piece on each one of those ribs. Because everything we do when we're building up these rail strips relies on the way we've glued the framework down onto the bottom skin, that we do that as accurate as we can. And then each one of these rail strips has to go right back onto the ribs to make sure that the board stays true to that original design that we've got tied up in the framework there. So now I'm going to grab that rail strip and use some hot water on each end, and that's just going to allow the timber to bend a little bit more easily. The hot water, it softens the lignin, which is the structural cells within the wood, softens them a little bit, allows them to bend, and so we can achieve those curves of the board much more easily then. So I just pour a little bit on each end because that's where the most of our twisting and bending is happening. These rail strips we process ourselves, so they are made out of the timber from out the front. Sometimes we use cedar, which is what I'm using here, but most of the time, to be fair, we use the poplar. It's a little bit more consistent without so many knots, so we don't get as much wastage. But when we're really concerned about the weight and or the colour, then we stick with the cedar. So then, start in the middle here with those first few clamps. You may notice we've got a fair few of these clamps in the workshop, and I've always thought you can never quite have too many clamps. You can see how that timber now that it's nice and warm, it's bending quite nicely to the shape that we need it to. And they're nesting on top of each other really nicely in there. And we end up with about 10 of these strips on each side. So once I've got this glue curing on here, like I say, it's about kind of 20 minutes or so for the glue to harden up enough that we can take the clamps off and start getting the next one on. Always a bit scary, this last bit, just because it's quite a lot of twist going on. Let's just pop that over and make sure we get some pressure down there. Pinch that back. Like I say, everything has got to go down onto those ribs. And just making sure that that's nicely closed up on that join there. And like I say, we're going to have about 10 of those rail strips that end up on each side. We've now got, I think we've got 7 on that side, and I think that's number 6 on this side. And once we've done that, we're going to plane a nice flat surface in the top of those rail strips. We fit solid pieces at the nose and tail, which finish those off nicely. And we have to put some wood inside or some foam inside for the fin boxes if we happen to be fitting fin boxes to it. That's for removable fin systems. If we've got a fixed fin, then we don't need to worry about putting anything inside. Once we've got all of those in place, it's a case then of gluing our top skin. You can see behind me there, the top skin for this board's ready to go. And once that's glued down, we get into the shaping of the board. So we start working our way through the hand tools, pairing it back to that finished shape that we're gonna want to get to. We've got a board on the front trestles that we're going to go over to and have a look at the shaping of. We've got a board that's had its top glued down. I've started some of the shaping, so you can see this deck skin would have overhung slightly, and I've used a series of planes to work back the wood to try and blend this into those rail strips. You can see the individual rail strips building up there, and you can see where the top skin comes to meet it. We get this dark brown kind of resinous, the overspill of the glue that we use for gluing the top skin down. And our job now is to try and pair this back to make that a really seamless blend from the deck right down onto those rails. So like I say, a little bit with the plane, so I've got a little bit to do at the nose here. And it's just delicately removing the wood, removing what feels to be the excess. And with the plane, obviously, you have to be really careful about the direction of the grain. In the poplar and in the cedar, there's often little swirls in the grain that mean as you come across it with the plane, it can dig in. So once I get to a point where I feel like I'm quite close with the plane, I'm going to jump down onto a rasp. This is a Japanese saw rasp, so it's got kind of coarse teeth one side, fine teeth the other. And for this shaping, again, we're removing quite a lot of material, so I'm going to use the coarse side. And it's just going to allow me to eat into some of that resin and kind of blend those rail strips and deck skin together quite nicely. So I'm just going to do a little section here. And it gives us a much neater finish along this glue line here. And I'm working kind of the main middle section of the board here, because before I've really cut the nose and tail to the right shape, it's not worth us worrying too much about this. So the next thing I'm going to do actually is set up to get that nose to the right shape. And then I can carry on with the plane and the rasp on the top edge here, blending the whole board to bring it together, because it's important for us with any surfboard that it has some symmetry in it. So we try and make sure that both sides of our board are exactly the same as each other. And that's mostly done, to be honest, most of it's done by feel. The grain in the wood can really throw your eyes off. So whilst your eyes can be a good guide, nothing really beats what your hands can tell you. And of course, the more times you do this, the more familiar you get with a board, the easier it all becomes. So the next thing I'm going to look at is flipping it over and working on our template. We're going to start thinking about the shape through the nose here. So we've got a template that we use to mirror on both sides. Like I said a minute ago, symmetry within our boards is crucial to the way they perform in the water. So what we're going to do here is try and make sure that the sides match up. So there is a lot of thought going into this, but it may look quite simple. But I want to just follow the rail as best I can and try and pick up through our nose here what shape we want. And I know that this line here is exactly where exactly where our rail strips stop. So that's following nicely there. I'm just going to draw around this bit. So everything outside my pencil line is excess material that theoretically we should now be ready to cut off once I'm happy that both sides are the same. So again, I'm going to mirror this across, hoping that it lines up exactly the same. The reason we draw this on the bottom surface is that with our framework being glued onto our bottom, this skin here is essentially like a datum point for all of the rest of the building of the board. So that's why we flip it over and roll on this side. And this is mirroring actually quite nicely. Sometimes we have to tweak these a little bit to make sure that they line up, but this has gone really smoothly, which I like the look of. Nice. Cool. So then it's a case of us removing this excess. So I'm going to use a Japanese pull saw here. It's one of my favourite tools to use in the workshop. It's called the Japanese pull saw because it's made in Japan and it cuts on the pull stroke, so it feels a little bit different. It looks a little bit different to use than a typical Western saw. You'll see it engages on the pull stroke, but I'm not going to be forcing it to do anything. I'm just going to do some nice long, light, smooth strokes. And although this has a flexible blade and it might be tempting to follow that curve, I'm just going to do a series of straight cuts to get the bulk of the material off and out of the way. So just guiding it in. So you can now see actually quite clearly, you've got the bottom skin here, then you've got this paler piece through the middle is our solid nose block, and then we've got our deck skin on the top there. So it's really nice actually to see the cross section of those there, and see how the board at the front there, how that's made. Cool, so then, where's my rasp? Oh, there it is. Then I'd use the rasp here again to bring us right the way back to that pencil line. I'm going to do the same on that side. And then I'll roll it back over and do all of the shaping on the top of the board first. So that brings the top surface of the board all to the right shape. And the top surface actually has much less to do with the water than the bottom side. So it's a really good opportunity for us and for customers who come to make their own boards to get familiar with the tools, get really comfortable with them, before we start looking at the intricacies of the underside, the bottom edge of the rails. That is what a lot of the performance of the board is going to be based upon. And once we've worked the shape out with the rasp, we then jump down onto a series of sanding blocks. So we kind of start with an 80 grit sandpaper, a nice big block, which means that we get a really smooth shape when we follow those rail lines. And then we work our way down through several other pieces of sandpaper to get to our finished shape. And once that's finished, we're ready to stamp it and sign it off. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been through every step of the process of making one of our boards, and I love nothing more than inspiring other people to get making. So recently I've been working on a book called Do Make, The Power of Your Own Two Hands, which explores 10 years worth of experience of running the workshop here, and also running the courses where we invite people in to come and make their own surfboards. Seeing other people stop from their busy lives, take some time to get involved in the making process, and enjoy just the time and space that making something gives you is an incredibly rewarding thing for me to do. I absolutely love sharing this with other people. So if you want to find out more about us, you can grab a copy of the book from us, from the Do Book Company. It's online on Amazon as well, or your local bookshop will be able to get hold of it. Or alternatively, you can find us at Otter Surfboards on Instagram. You can find our website www.ottersurfboards.co.uk as well, which will have all of the details about our upcoming workshop. So if you want to get involved with making and come down to see us in Cornwall, then just hit those links. Thank you.